Let me ask you something powerful. What happens in someone else's mind when you finally walk away? Not slam the door, just leave. Not out of hate, but from clarity, from knowing you deserve peace more than chaos. When you withdraw your energy, your presence, your validation, something remarkable happens in their psyche. They may not admit it, but inside, something begins to unravel. There is a strange and undeniable power in absence. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands attention, but the silent withdrawal that echoes in the spaces people never thought they would miss. When you walk away, you don't simply leave a room, a relationship, or a conversation. You remove your energy, your reflection, your role in their psychological story. And in that sudden vacancy, something begins to stir in the depths of the unconscious. Most people are not aware of how much they rely on others to maintain their sense of self. In every relationship, we play a role, perhaps the healer, the listener, the comforter, the one who absorbs pain and makes sense of it. Over time, that role becomes an expectation. It becomes invisible, like the air they breathe, until one day you are no longer there to play it. And suddenly, they are gasping for breath, unsure why the world feels colder, why their certainty feels shaken. Your absence confronts them with something they have spent their life avoiding themselves. This is where the psyche begins to fracture and reveal its truth. When you were present, your energy acted as a mirror. They saw themselves in you. They loved what they loathed, what they envied, and what they disowned. You didn't just exist beside them. You held up a reflection that they depended on, even if they didn't know it. And when that mirror is taken away, they are forced to stare into the void that remains. The void is not empty. It is filled with memories, unspoken words, misunderstood moments. And within those memories, their own projections begin to whisper back at them. The things they accused you of, they were never about you. The way they misunderstood your silence, your needs, your boundaries, those were their inner wounds trying to make sense of your presence. Now, in your absence, those wounds have no more distraction. They have nothing to blame. So the mind turns inward, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps painfully. And in that turning, a question arises. What part of me did they take with them? Why does their leaving feel like a loss I cannot explain? It is in this psychological space that transformation begins, not always immediately, not always gently, but inevitably. The person you walked away from is left with their thoughts, their regrets, their what-ifs. They may distract themselves, they may tell stories to soothe their ego, but deep down, where the unconscious stirs, your absence is rewriting their internal narrative. And perhaps the most compelling truth is this. They begin to realize what you truly were, not just a person, but a presence, a soul that brought clarity, depth, and perhaps a discomfort they weren't ready to face. That discomfort wasn't your fault, it was the tension between who they pretended to be and what your presence quietly revealed. Absence strips away illusion. It reveals what was never said. It invites reflection where there was once reaction. And whether they acknowledge it or not, your walking away marks the beginning of their inner reckoning. Not all will grow from it. Some will deny, some will numb, some will lash out. But for those willing to face the silence with honesty, your absence becomes a mirror more powerful than your presence ever was. Every human being carries within them a shadow, a hidden, unconscious part of the self that is made up of everything the conscious mind refuses to accept. It is built from fears, insecurities, pain, rage, longing, and all the traits we have learned to suppress in order to survive, to belong, to be loved. But what we do not integrate, we unconsciously project. We cast these denied aspects of ourselves onto others, often the very people closest to us. And the irony is this. The more someone matters to us, the more likely we are to unconsciously use them as a screen upon which we project the most intimate parts of our own inner world. When you walked into their life, you didn't just arrive as a person, you arrived as a reflection. You stirred things in them they couldn't explain. You awakened parts of themselves that had long been buried. Maybe you were deeply emotional. Maybe you asked questions they weren't ready to answer. Maybe your presence disrupted the calm surface they had carefully constructed over years of avoidance. They saw you, but more importantly, they saw what they had hidden within themselves. And so they began to project. They told themselves that you were too intense, too demanding, too sensitive, too unpredictable. But they were not speaking about you, they were speaking about the aspects of their own soul they had never made peace with. You became the container for everything they did not wish to see. And the more you tried to be understood, the more they resisted. Because understanding you would require understanding themselves. That is a terrifying threshold, one many are not ready to cross. Projection is not malicious. It is a defense. It is the psyche's way of protecting itself from pain. But it is also the very reason so many relationships fall apart. Not because of who we are, but because of what we represent in the unconscious world of another. We carry the weight of their childhood wounds, their repressed desires, their unspoken fears. And when we finally walk away, when we remove ourselves from the dynamic, they are forced to face the mirror we once held up to them. In the beginning, they may blame you. They may rewrite the story to make sense of their discomfort, but slowly, sometimes after months, sometimes after years, the silence you left behind begins to speak louder than any words you ever said. They may look back and realize that what they ran from wasn't you, but the shadow you revealed. That you weren't asking too much. They were unwilling to give what they never learned to hold within themselves. Your love felt overwhelming, not because it was excessive, but because it was unfamiliar. It touched a place inside them that had been numb for far too long. And so, when you leave, you don't just take yourself, you take the mirror. The projection no longer has a home. It dissolves, and what remains is the truth. Some will resist this truth. Others will finally begin to see. They will begin to notice how often they blamed others for the things they could unface in themselves. They will begin to understand that what they rejected in you was often what they had abandoned in their own soul. This is the quiet transformation your absence initiates, the end of projection, and the slow, painful invitation to self. It is not always visible from the outside, but deep within, something shifts. Your walking away doesn't only remove a person, it disrupts a psychological pattern, and in that disruption lies the rare and raw potential for awakening. The ego is a masterful architect. It builds its world out of certainty, control, and the illusion of permanence. It defines itself through roles, labels, possessions, relationships, anything that offers a sense of stability in an otherwise uncertain existence. And when you are part of someone's life, the ego does not merely see you as a person, a predictable force, someone whose reactions it can anticipate, whose forgiveness it can depend on, whose presence it can rely upon to maintain its carefully crafted image of self. But when you walk away, the architecture begins to tremble. Your departure isn't just a physical absence. It is a psychological earthquake. You remove not only your body but your energy, your agreement to participate in the story the ego has written. And without that participation, the story starts to fall apart. The version of themselves they believed confident, admired, superior, or even victimized suddenly loses its context. Now, they are left with silence where once there was affirmation, indifference where once there was emotional pursuit. The ego cannot thrive in ambiguity. It recoils from the unknown, and in your absence, ambiguity is all that remains. Questions arise that the ego cannot honestly answer. Why did they leave? Why didn't I see it coming? Was I wrong? The certainty begins to dissolve, and in that the deeper self begins to stir an unfamiliar voice, a quieter but more honest one, whispering truths that the ego worked tirelessly to suppress. This disruption is painful, but it is essential. Growth does not come through comfort. It comes through the cracking of the shell. And ego disruption is the first crack. There is a particular discomfort that follows when someone realizes they no longer have power over you, that they cannot summon you with guilt, or control you through silence, or bind you through dependency. The illusion of control is one of the ego's most prized possessions. When that illusion breaks, what's left is vulnerability. And in that vulnerability lies the truth of who they really are, not who they pretend to be, but who they have become through a lifetime of fear, defense, and denial. They may resist it at first. They may lash out, attempt to rewrite the narrative, seek validation elsewhere, but none of it will feel the same, because your presence wasn't just another character in their play. It was a reflection of what they most needed to face. And so, your walking away is not merely an ending, it is the beginning of a reckoning, a confrontation between the ego and the soul, one that may lead to awakening, to healing, or to collapse. But whatever the outcome, your absence becomes the catalyst. It exposes the fault lines beneath the surface. It reveals where authenticity has been buried beneath pretense. And in doing so, it offers the one thing the ego fears most and the soul desires most: transformation. There comes a moment in every soulless journey when it becomes clear that holding on is more painful than letting go. It is not born from anger, nor from the desire to wound, but from the quiet realization that one can no longer betray themselves to maintain the illusion of connection. Detachment is not a rejection of love, it is the highest form of it. It is the act of choosing truth over fantasy, peace over chaos, and self-respect over the need for external validation. And in that detachment, a profound transformation begins. When you walk away, not in bitterness but in clarity, something shifts in both you and the one you leave behind. The roles you once played disintegrate. The energy that fed the emotional cycle dissolves. What remains is space, and in that space, the soul begins to breathe again. You are no longer consumed by the need to be understood, to explain, to fix what was never yours to heal. You stop trying to convince someone of your worth and instead begin to feel it pulsing quietly within you. But the transformation is not yours alone. The one you detached from is forced to confront an emptiness they had never imagined. Your presence was a structure in their emotional life, sometimes one they leaned on, sometimes one they pushed against, but always one they depended upon. When you step away, that structure collapses, and for the first time, they must stand alone within the wreckage of what was, and ask themselves what part they played in its collapse. Detachment, when done in love and integrity, does not destroy, it reveals. It strips away the illusion that another person can complete you, or that your presence can save someone from their own unexamined wounds. It invites both people to face themselves without the buffer of blame or distraction. And this facing, though painful, is where transformation becomes possible. You begin to see yourself more clearly. The parts of you that once settled for less, that tolerated confusion as love, that mistook intensity for intimacy, begin to dissolve. In their place grows something quieter but stronger, a self that is no longer willing to abandon its own truth. You stop negotiating your value in the currency of someone else's approval. For them, if they are willing to listen to the silence, a different path emerges. One that leads inward, toward reflection, remorse, perhaps even awakening. Your detachment becomes their mirror, one they cannot look away from. And while not all will choose to grow from it, the opportunity remains a seed planted by your decision to walk away, not in hate, but in hope. Transformation through detachment is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is sacred. It is the moment when the soul says, I choose myself, not because I do not love you, but because I finally love me. It is this choice that breaks the old pattern and gives birth to something truer, deeper, and lasting. So if you've walked away or you're standing at that threshold, wondering if you should know this, you are not being selfish. You are being awake. Let them sit with the silence. Let them feel the void your energy once filled. Because in that space, something powerful is happening. They are meeting themselves, and you are finally meeting you. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever walked away from someone and witnessed their change from afar? Or are you standing in that moment right now ready to reclaim your peace? Comment below with your story. Like if this message resonated with your soul. Share this with someone who needs to hear. Walking away is not weakness. It is wisdom.